Well, why don't we get started? Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Tonight is Dao De Jing. We'll be covering verses 71 and 72. Type exclamation point in the chat to read your favorite version of this verse. Penny, thank you.
All right. Okay. This is the Stephen Mitchell, 71. Not knowing is true knowledge. Presuming to know is a disease. First realize that you are sick, then you can move toward health. The master is her own physician. She has healed herself of all knowing. Thus she is truly whole.
Thank you, Penny. Next up, we have David, followed by Evanique.
So this is the thing in English for chapter 71 of Dao De Jing. Knowing ignorance is strength. Ignoring knowledge is sickness. If one is sick of sickness, then one is not sick. A sage is not sick because he is sick of sickness. Therefore, he is not sick.
Thank you, David. Next up, we have Evanique, followed by Katie.
So this is John R. Mabry, a Christian reader of Dao De Jing, chapter 71. She who knows that she does not know is the best off. He who pretends to know but doesn't is ill. Only someone who realizes he is ill can become whole. The sage is not ill because she recognizes this illness as illness. Therefore, she is not ill.
Thank you, Evanique. Let's see, do we have any? Oh, Katie.
Yeah, I'm going to read from Derek Lynn. To know that you do not know is highest. To not know but think you know is flawed. Only when recognizes the fault as a fault can one be without fault. The sages are without fault because they recognize the fault as a fault. That is why they are without fault.
That's an interesting version. Thank you for sharing. And next up, is that Brian?
Yes.
Thank you.
So this is McDonald.
Okay.
Knowing you don't know is wholeness. Thinking you know is a disease. Only by recognizing that you have an illness can you move to seek a cure. The master is whole because she sees her illnesses and treats them, and thus is able to remain whole.
Thank you, Brian. And would anybody else like to read for their favorite version? Margaretha, I was hoping that you would type exclamation point.
Sorry, I was late, so I have to fix things first.
No problem at all.
It's a bit longer.
Okay.
Barang
Great.
siapa yang mengerti, tapi tidak membanggakan dirinya mengerti, itulah tandanya memiliki pengertian yang tinggi. Sebaliknya, yang sesungguhnya tidak mengerti, tapi gemar menonjolkan diri sebagai orang yang mengerti, itulah kecacatan. Barang siapa mengenali cacat dalam diri, barulah ia dapat membersihkan cacat itu, sehingga tak punya cacat lagi. Seorang bijak tak mempunyai cacat, karena telah mengetahui segala cacat. So, yeah, it's similar with the other, but a bit longer in the sentences.
Beautifully read. I always enjoy it. And I guess, would anyone else like to read their favorite version? If not, I actually will go ahead and we'll read the Ursula Le Guin version. verse number 71, she titles it The Sick Mind. To know without knowing is best. Not knowing without knowing, it is sick. To be sick of sickness is the only cure. The wise aren't sick, they're sick of sickness, so they're well. With that, why don't we go to Jason for his translation?
Well, Joe, do you want to mention the comments from Ursula Le Guin?
I might actually bring those up in after Jason shares his comment. Actually, I will next time. So thank you for that.
Okay, let me bring up. I don't know where it is. Did you see my translation or no?
I don't.
Just one minute. I don't know where it is. Dao De Jing, this one. Is this one my email? Look like. Okay, this one. Did you see the translation chapter 71?
Now,
Now I do.
No?
now,
You do? Yes or no?
We see it now. Yes, we do.
Chapter 71. I call it the flawless. Okay. So it's very short. Knowing but to believe it is unknown is merit. Not knowing but to believe it is known is a flaw. The sage is flawless because he recognizes his flaws as flaws. That means he knowing what he does not know. He recognizes his flaws as flaws. For this reason, he is flawless. I'm very surprised, almost except a few, all translate as sick or ill or disease. Because this word, 病, okay, is by on the surface means sick, but in a lot of place means a fault, defect. Okay, so I really very surprised. Most of translation just capture the surface meaning, not the meaning in this one, because I think it's translated as illness or disease, probably misleading, right? Because it's nothing with the health. It's talking about the epistemology. So that's I need to say. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's I mean, the only other I see, ill is another word that's used as well. But yeah, I have not seen the word flaw used. Amon, would you like to comment?
Oh, absolutely. And I should warn everybody, just because the chapter's short doesn't mean the discussion on it is.
That's right.
This is the scholar's go-to chapter to do a thumbnail litmus test. Does the person doing the translation actually know classical Chinese, or are they working from other source material, and or are they just looking up characters in a modern dictionary? Because what Jason was saying is right. Bing does translate as illness if you look it up in a modern dictionary. It's in the classic Chinese sense that it doesn't only mean illness. It actually also means fault or flaw or something being, what's the phrase I was looking for? Troubled is another way of actually describing it. And it's really a difficult passage to translate because, as Jason will tell you, the characters are very simple. They're very, very terse. They say, really, some of these are just as short as not, no, no. That's one way to translate some of those characters. And then there is oodles and years of commentary of thinkers who have pored over these lines to interpret what Lao Tzu meant by some of these. In fact, Jason and I, in doing this one, were discussing it. He was talking about Su Chi's commentary on it as an understanding of these characters. And I agree. I think that Su Chi is an excellent source to go to. I want to read to you all Wang Bi, who most of the received Dao De Jing translations are based on his work. And his commentary on this, first of all, his translation, and this is an old one, but it basically says, if a ruler, that's in parentheses, excuse me, doesn't not know that knowledge is not fit for application, then he is in trouble. That's how he translates the first line. And his commentary on it is, if a ruler knows that he should not make use of knowledge, he will be esteemed. If a ruler does not know about knowledge not being fit for application, he will be in trouble. This was his understanding of these first few very, very terse lines. And so there's a logic puzzle at play here between what is known, what is unknown, what is merited, and what is fault or flaw. And fault or flaw or illness is a better translation of being, because it has the strict meaning of something gone awry. Whereas the term sick is really a misnomer, because we use that term not only in a physical sense, but also in a sense of exhaustion or malaise of spirit. And the word being has no meaning of that embedded in it. So this is a challenging one. I'll be interested to see everyone else's thoughts on it, but it's, like I said, the litmus test go-to. Flip to chapter 71, see if they translated being right. If they did, they know they're Chinese. If they did not, they did not have acumen with classical Chinese.
Thank you, Aman. So I'm going to go ahead and actually read Ursula Le Guin's commentary on this particular chapter. What you know without knowing it, you know, is the right kind of knowledge. Any other kind, conviction, theory, dogmatic belief, opinion, isn't the right kind. And if you don't know that, you'll lose the way. This chapter is an example of exactly what Lao Tzu was talking about in the last one: obscure clarity, well-concealed jade. We had a very long discussion about that. So I just thought I would throw that out there. Go ahead and type exclamation point in the chat. Go ahead, David, to read.
Yes, there's actually I'll just start with the DC Lin, which I think captures this very well. I mean, I had noticed this in these other translations, and thanks very much to Aman and Jason for clarifying this. The DC Lin starts out saying, "Who knows that he does not know is the highest. Who pretends to know what he does not know is sick-minded." But I agree that they start getting into the sick versus flawed and the rest of it. It's always, but I mean, this is one of the most important concepts, if I understand this correctly, that I've actually seen in leadership in general, is, and the wisest people are the people who know what they don't know. That's really key to everything that I've seen in my career. So, and that's the most trustworthy and wise people. I mean, especially both in, I think there's, he's saying at the end here with the sage of being self-aware, that, I mean, that, you know, the sage is not sick-minded because he recognizes, I mean, it's all, again, this sick, but I mean, the sage is aware of his limitations. The sage is aware of what he or she doesn't know. So that's what really makes a wise sage person. But also, I mean, I found this incredibly important for trust and everything else, is to know not just knowing when to say something, when not to say something, but to really, in major leadership positions I've seen in corporations and everywhere else, is to know what one doesn't know, and therefore not to start filling in information. That if one is confident in what one's limits and presents that to other leaders, and that develops an incredible amount of trust in those leaders. They know that the person is only stating what they are confident about, and therefore they trust more of what the person will say, as opposed to a person who just starts babbling on. And that's a sure way to lose the trust of competent executives.
Thank you, David. I'm just going to, comment a little bit about that, because I think Ursula Le Guin kind of really hits this point nicely, in the sense that she talks about dogmatic thinking and conviction, and this idea that you already know everything that needs to be known, so that you kind of already have this closed mindset, and then so that there really isn't an unknown in that kind of approach to the world. And I think that's, you make a really, really good point, is that people that are not self-aware and that really don't accept their limitations and understand what they don't know, they often do lose the trust of not only the people that they're leading, but sometimes themselves as well in that process. Those are just some brief comments building over what you had talked about. And that was some of my takeaway. Those were some of my takeaways as well. Aman.
Yeah, I just wanted to bolster what David was saying about the real value of recognizing the limitations of one's knowledge, and also having the discernment to be able to identify knowledge that may only seem applicable, but actually can really be a detriment. And two things come to mind. One is the story of Socrates and the Oracle of Delphi. He supposedly was the wisest man in Athens because he was the one guy who realized he didn't know anything. That was what kept getting him in trouble. And obviously a leader, because here it is a couple thousand years later, still being talked about. The other example I was thinking about the misapplication of knowledge, or knowledge that ought not to be brought to bear, made me once again think of our good friend Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg and the facial recognition software that was all the hype for about 2 years, until they realized, oh crap, this is a terrible idea and it has really bad consequences. And now they've begun reeling it back in, because even though that knowledge may have value to the development of AI and how algorithms can actually be written and what it could do technologically, the venue it was being deployed to was just begging a recipe for disaster. And that's kind of what has happened as a result. So there's two paths to good leadership. One is recognition of one's own ignorance, but the other is recognition or discernment of what is valueless knowledge to a given enterprise. And I think those two things together are pretty rare, but I think that's kind of, if I'm not misparaphrasing you, David, what you were sort of getting at there.
Was that David, do you want to reply really quickly, or just say?
No, nothing to reply. Thanks very much for the extension and the additional comments. I'm on very, very on point.
And that's actually, I was thinking about the use of technology as well. As we're talking also about applied knowledge. We're really getting to something deeper, which is wisdom. And that's not necessarily just knowledge isn't necessarily wisdom. Margarita.
Yeah, I think still in line with David's and Amon's notes on this. What I feel after reading this, actually this idea about not rejecting but making a distance with knowledge from Dao De Jing has made me think about myself, because I work in education industry, so we are quite boastful about producing knowledge. People who work in this setting, what is that? So to me, this is more like a time to understand. Even in some verses, I think the leader should also not control but manage people with knowledge, so they're not overdo things. So and this verse, I think it's more this chapter talk about how we recognize our own limitation, just like David said. But today, I think I see more similarities with academic settings. This is almost like Popper's falsification. At least to know what is the limit of your knowledge, you should find falsification of your ideas. I think that's also important for people who work in in academic setting, who produce knowledge, to know what is your limitation, what is your knowledge, where it came from, is it real? And how should I use this knowledge so it's not ruining the nature, the real life? Yeah, this got me thinking. So I also enjoyed this chapter so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Margarita. Next up, we have Kevin.
You, Joe. I'm Jason, everyone. Good evening. Yes, if I maybe talk more, you can stop me, Joe.
Go ahead. Go right ahead. Kevin.
Yeah, for me, we from our 52, I learn normally favorite known. We hear things, we search from a knower, we search unknown from personal. If known unknown is the best. Let's try what I'm not good at. I'm going to search for it. Question ourselves. It's hard. The first one is self-awareness about, do we need to know more? Yes or no. Normally, I good enough. I got 20-year experience. I'm older than you. I'm bigger than you. One scenario from this chapter and next chapter, think about Union, European, what's happening now. Russia, Ukraine, EU, US, and across the world. You think about this, so next is unknown, known. Sometimes we find this. At the best, of the unknown. The language itself, word itself, so problematic. From the old language, by the way, another is about being, illness. It's not just a physical ill, also mental illness or spiritual, or it's non-functional. Then I'm going to insert this here. If I'm interpreting this, because it's short, I'm trying to speak more. Wise people worry about what weakness or flaw I didn't see from myself. They're looking for a flaw for themselves. Then correct them. Then they want the benefit is don't let those flaws control yourself or sad. Why I didn't have this problem? When flaw happens, it's going to affect your life or your thought. You don't understand. If you keep thinking, you relax. Opposite way, unadvised or self-fooled, not you don't want to know the self. Think about, oh, that's my flaw. I don't let anybody know it. I just show my best part to the world. Then show my best. That's what's happening now. If you think both sides, everyone is going to show I'm powerful, I'm good, only good news, not bad news. One Chinese old saying, 报喜不报忧, that's the problem. But we practice a lot. That becomes our modern culture. And the last one is everybody, if you know your own weakness, you're brave to face it, you correct it. That's the best. Be humble. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Jason, I noticed that you, Katie, I know you're next, but Jason, do you want to comment really quickly? Or do you?
No, let Katie go first.
Okay. Sure. I didn't know if you wanted to respond to Kevin. Go ahead, Katie.
So far it seems like we're talking about it just from the perspective of the self, like being aware that you might not know all the information about a situation. I think for a lot of like decisions in government, they don't make the decision in isolation from other people. So you might be seeing it from one perspective and someone might be seeing it from a different perspective. So maybe they have like more knowledge of an aspect of the problem, or they can read a certain situation better. So like being open to feedback and knowing, okay, that person over there like reads this really well, and this person does this really well, and then being open that you don't know, and maybe someone would know more than you in a certain area, and being open and like relying that their perception could be adding something to this, even when it's bad, like almost it's like even when like I have a friend, he reads people so well, like better than me. Sometimes even my border collie reads people better than me. You know what I mean? Like being able to like recognize when someone, like, well, maybe I should take their perception and then edit it, without like, then that's a little bit like a humbleness of spirit, because then that might also be admitting like, I'm not the best at this, or someone is better than me at this. But I think that's how people make good decisions, is recognizing where other people are strong.
Yes.
And yeah.
No, I completely agree with that idea. Shrikant has talked about one of the most important things is to know your strengths, but to then surround yourself with people that actually that can help you with your weaknesses. That was excellent. Thank you, Katie. I hope I didn't cut you off there too early. I didn't intend to.
You did. It was perfect. Yeah.
Okay. Jason.
Yeah, let me change the subject a little bit about the translation. Okay, let me show this one. Because this one actually really a challenge to me, because I would like to be like most of translator in Chinese or in English. They always like to translate the first stanza as knowing what you don't know, just like what Socrates talked about. Or just like Confucius in the Analect talk about knowing what if you are knowing, you say you are knowing. If you don't know, you say you don't know. But if you look at the Chinese character, just like Amang just mentioned, it's very simple. 知, that means no, not no, not no, no. Okay, so it's really challenging for me because remember, there's no punctuation, okay, in the original text. So you have to understand this text as knowing what you don't know, or you are to understand knowing but not know. Okay, so these two, the connection between these two terms is a challenge. So the reason I decided to translate as knowing but you don't know, there's two reasons. One is the famous scholar Su Ce, okay, he interprets this one as knowing but you don't know. Second is if you translate as knowing what you don't know, then the second sentence you will translate as not knowing what you know, and it's a fault. So I think that doesn't make sense. If you not knowing what you know, it should not be the flow. That's for this reason, I have to translate it as knowing, but you don't know what you know. But believe you don't know, and then that's good because I think that fit to the Taoism thinking. Like you are familiar with something, but you don't know you are really familiar. You are not aware you're familiar with something. Okay, so that means, okay, it's good. Okay, just
Mm.
like when you are good at skiing or swimming, right? You probably not knowing you are moving your right hand, the left hand, the right hand, left hand, and at the same time you are kicking. When you are skiing, you don't think about like push your right leg to turn right side, turn right or turn right. You don't think about this. So you know, but you don't know you know it. So that's why I think that's for two reasons. One is the grammar probably fit in the structure. Secondly, I think that probably fit to what Taoism thinking about epistemology, which is a little bit than what Confucius is talking about. So that's a little bit detail, and just like to share with everyone. Yeah, thank you.
No, that's a fantastic point. And I'm really, really glad you brought that up. That actually brings a whole new dynamic to it. So next up, we have Madeline.
Well, Jason actually just answered my question, which had been about what type of knowing was meant in this, whether it was a Confucian type or more of an enlightened wise man type.
There you go. So I guess then it's good that he went before you. So then next we have Brian.
Let me make sure. Okay, I agree with everyone has said, especially in the leadership or organizational context, which kicked this off. I'd like to take it a step further, again, in the leadership and organizational context. And that is, and I think this honestly is consistent with Jason's translation. And that's why one reason I kind of like Jason's compared to some of the others. What I would say is that you all have talked about the limitation of knowledge, and that limitation applies to some things, but not to others. I think the limitation applies to all things. In other words, you cannot definitely know what you do not know. And you cannot definitely know what you do know.
Right.
And and so it's good as an operational matter to exactly as Jason wrote in his translation, knowing, but to believe it is unknown is a merit. In other words, knowing, you honestly believe that you understand the situation and, let's say, the correct decision in this context. So let's call that knowing. But to believe or to pretend that you don't know is a merit. And that's a merit partly because you might be totally wrong. You think you know, but you don't. And it's also a very good approach because if you keep your mouth shut about what you think you know, other people will confirm your knowledge. And the more you get confirmation from other people, the more you have confidence or assurance in your knowledge. It's quite possible that you're all wrong in the end. But the best assurance is to reach some sort of common understanding about the knowledge, the relevant knowledge in a certain circumstance. So that's, I think, and then the second line kind of flows from my understanding of that first. But I really think it is this inability to know also applies to our belief in what we know. And so the limitation of knowledge applies not just to some things, but to everything. We can't know that we know anything.
It's kind of a skeptic's approach.
Yes.
To philosophy.
Well, it's, again, in this organizational context, it is just probabilities.
Right.
because you're thinking and planning about the future. And there are two things that lead to the uncertainty. You know, any one person's experience and the knowledge built on that, and then the uncertainties that are going to arise in the future. You can't know, you can't really, you can try to predict, but you can't make things happen in the future. And certainly your knowledge doesn't make things happen. So I think it's much better to, for both of those reasons, to be humble, as Kevin said. Assume you know nothing and see what the group comes up with.
I
It's-
just wanted to add in a picture, we once, when we were discussing something in another class, and they drew a big circle. And then they drew a little sliver in the circle and said, okay, this is what you know. And they drew another sliver, maybe 3 times that circle size, and said, okay, this is what you don't know. And then the whole rest of the circle is things that you don't know, but you don't know them. So, which is kind of what I think this 71 is about. There's so much out there that you don't know, and that you don't know it.
Yeah, I mean, this is fascinating on a number of levels. One, I was in actually 2 different discussions over the weekend. One is how science actually, people want certainty out of science, and it simply doesn't provide you with that. And it's one of the reasons people don't necessarily accept it, is that it doesn't give them the certainty that they want. So they kind of revert to some other belief system. And then that's kind of what Ursula Le Guin was kind of warning us about. Then there was this other meetup that I was in. It was also interesting, where we talked about the idea of bounded rationality, and like essentially your limitations of knowing, just and it goes to exactly what you were just saying, Penny, that it's limited by your experiences. So, you know, and what you can infer. So that there is this huge amount of things that we don't know, and that and it ended up being, the conversation was more about acting on instinctual behavior as a way of actually embracing the unknown and creativity. So there's a whole other, I can go on for about 10 minutes about that, but that was another interesting meetup, and maybe we'll come back to that point, but I want to let Aman speak.
Oh, thank you. Actually, something Brian just said made me reconsider a little bit about this passage and what it may be subtextually about. Brian said something about, you know, ability to predict. One thing that we know, and I now almost hesitate to use that term, but one thing we know about the imperial dynasties of China around this time is that prediction was paramount. I Ching sort of readings and being able to forecast events was of absolute paramount concern to most of these leaders. And it struck me as Brian was talking that that could be part of what the criticism at work here is, and the caution against false knowledge, against a belief in having knowledge that you do not in fact possess. Because just because the yarrow sticks were thrown in an auspicious way, and you believe because your advisors have told you that this makes it, you know, auspicious for XYZ action, you would be wise to question that knowledge, to not rely upon that knowledge as if it were as certain as the Pythagorean theorem. And I've never seen it actually brought out in any commentary that this is directly a critique of the I Ching sort of forecasting, but it would make sense that it could be understood that way, especially in place and time. So I just wanted to throw that out there too. And thank Brian for actually saying the words predict, because that clicked it into place for me.
Great comments. Thank you, Madeline.
Yeah, I thought I would just chime in on this one. There's something known as the two non-overlapping magisteria. It's the idea that there's sort of two realms of how to know things. One is religion and spirituality, and the other is science. And that it's not necessary to use one to prove or disprove the other. We can just accept that they're kind of separate realms. I had thought that this was something that someone had come up with in the middle of the last century, but as it turns out, it's Stephen Jay Gould.
Thank you, Madeline. Let's see, next up we have, actually, I don't see anybody up in the queue. So, Aman.
I'll take advantage of the silence then.
Go ahead.
As far as I've been reading a lot on philosophy of mind lately, and one of what they call the hard problems of philosophy of mind surrounds consciousness and surrounds specifically something that is called qualia, which is you can think of as the quality of things, the taste of coffee, the feeling of a sunset, the things that are inexplicable and ineffable. We have no way to actually give word to what these things are, but we experience them in a very real way. And I think what Madeline was talking about this idea of religion and science as two separate realms, I would venture to say religion is where you get an exploration of qualia much more than you do in science. There's a thought experiment that they present, and this kind of presents this the can trap of believing knowledge. They assert a hypothetical woman who is born 100 years from now, who is the leading expert on color. She knows everything that not only is currently known, but in 100 years could be known about the nature of color, light wavelengths, the nature of cones and rods in the eyes, ganglion nerves, stem, the receptive areas of the brain, the biochemistry, et cetera, et cetera. She's the foremost expert and knows absolutely everything there is to be known about color. There's one catch. She has lived and been raised in an entirely black and white environment. Her walls are painted white, her clothes are black or white, everything that she's learned in print in black and white. So her entire 30, 40-year existence has been one in black and white, in which she became the foremost expert on this subject. On her 40th birthday, you open the door to the compound in which she lives, and you allow her to walk into the world and actually see a red rose, a golden sunflower, a green tree. And the question here, the hypothetical is, in that moment, has she learned something new or not? Everything that could be known was already known by her. But in having this experience, has she in fact learned something new? Most of us, I think, just reflexively have the inclination to say, well, yes, she learned the experience of color that cannot be known in words or in language or in any sort of expertise that science can provide. And that, I think, also is emphasizing what Brian was saying about the limit of ability to have articulatable knowledge about things, to be able to express the world in some sort of completely refined, reified, captured cork board. The world doesn't actually operate like that. There is something in it that exceeds that sort of knowing or knowledge, or at least runs congruent to that sort of knowing or knowledge.
Yeah, actually, beautifully put. And I was actually, the other thing that comes up for me, and I actually now I do see a couple people we have in the queue actually. So I'll let Brian comment and then I'll come back. Beautifully said, Amon. Brian or Penny.
Well, I would like to speak up in favor of philosophy and point out that many people believe they're not just these two realms, religion and science. There's three realms: religion, science, and philosophy. Each of them is based on a different methodology and draws different types of conclusions, reaches a different type of understanding, but they're all based on agreement. They're all based on agreement. So the religion is, the methodology is revelation. Revelation from an authority, God or God's messenger. And the agreement is the agreement of all believers in that authority. Science is the study of natural phenomena, and the agreement is agreement of all those who have studied the same phenomena in the same way and experienced the same result. So it's the objects also of these different spheres are slightly different. The third is philosophy, and the methodology is experience and reflection on your experience. And the outcome again is agreement. If there's each person has his or her own philosophy, but really to be accepted as a philosophy, it needs to be articulated, understood, and then agreed to some extent by a group of people. Now there's a difference between the science and the philosophy in that the outcome of science should be some agreement on the occurrence of a natural phenomenon, some cause and effect that can be repeated in the future.
Right.
So it's certainty and predictable. That, we'll call that, I don't know, scientific knowledge. In the philosophical area, it's experience. Experience is always unique, cannot be repeated. So we can't have the same kind of agreement in a philosophical area, but we can have is mutual respect for differences, a kind of mutual respect that doesn't really exist in science in the same way. And religion, I would like to be able to say that there's mutual respect in the sphere of religion, but it's often missing. So that's, and also in philosophy, but that's, I think I just want to put in a good word for philosophy and show that it does have its place.
It most certainly does. I also thought about something else, is this idea of sociological experiments as well, and how those are experiences that can't be repeated. But nonetheless, this is information and knowledge that is accumulated, but it's not necessarily, that's one of the problems with their experiments, is that they're often not repeated, but it's still, it's an experience that people have that it's trying to essentially explain. So the sociological sciences are.
Well, in the social science area, it is the social studies, which, to the extent they can claim a science, is that they've controlled for the variables. And to the extent you can't do that, the outcomes are based on statistics, probability, what tends to occur.
Right. Kevin, you're next.
Yes, thank you. I would question about know. Assume we knowing something. That's knowing is moving. I want an idiom from Chinese called a couple called from 刻舟求剑. Basically, it's one guy ride a boat. Then his knife dropped on the river. Then, oh, where my knife dropped? He marked on the covered on the gunwale of a moving boat, but that's marked down. He didn't notice this boat moving, so he, of course, he cannot find it, right? It's another called 守株待兔. Basically, rabbit hit on the one of the trees, died. The guy say, "Oh, can we have this kind of lucky? I'm going to wait for that wait over the tree, wait for another rabbit going to hit the tree and catch them." So that's yeah, it's knowing self. We assume we know it. Are we really know it? Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Are there any other comments about verse number 71? Margarita.
Yeah, it just, yeah, I agree with what is knowledge? With Amon, I mean, I haven't finished my sentence. What is knowledge? Is it because we know an object, or is it because we put something in our mind and how we make our relationship with the concept we put in our mind? Because I think even a very religious person can also be non-dogmatic. It doesn't have to be because it's religion, then it becomes dogmatic, but how you put that concept into your mind, that makes you dogmatic. Now I also think, like just what Evan said, I kind of nervous if I say I know. No, let's say it's unique. So in some studies in psychology, even we predict that nowadays it is more on political views that can predict people decision making, not personality anymore. Well, some of us will run out of our job, but anyway, what I want to ask to Amon and Jason, in Dao De Jing, then how should people achieve knowledge? I mean, the better knowledge, is it just by standing still, or is there any other way that knowing that what we know is unknown? How can you elaborate a little bit? Thank you.
Let me answer. Okay. I think when we talk about knowledge, in my opinion, all the Taoism, including Laozi, Dao De Jing, and Zhuangzi, the later philosopher, they all against Confucius type of knowledge, or traditional way of knowledge. Like we are learning more, we are studying, we think hard. Okay, just like today's student, they all against this kind of knowledge. If you jump to the chapter 81, the last chapter, talk about like if you learn a lot, that means not knowing. Okay, the person who knows doesn't. They use the word erudite. Okay, means very broad knowledge. So I think, and then this kind of so-called against the knowledge, not only for the people. Okay, they wish the people they govern is no knowledge, and they also don't want the ruler use knowledge to govern the people. So I think, well, forget about I agree or disagree. Okay, that's what they are talking about. And another thing famous in Zhuangzi, okay, the later philosopher, in his inner section, I think in chapter 2, at the beginning, he talked about your life is limited. You don't live forever, but the knowledge is limitless. You use what is limited to pursue what is limitless. Okay, it's stupid. Okay, you are sick on doing this. So they are against pursuing knowledge, but doesn't mean they don't want the wisdom. Okay, they want the wisdom without study very hard. So that's kind of thing they are talking about. So that's my opinion. And then from doing this, I'm just saying what they are saying. I'm not saying they are right, or I'm not saying I agree. So that's the Taoism teaching.
Yeah, I think Jason's absolutely right. There is an anti-knowledge bend to or slant to most of the writings of the Dao De Jing or of the Zhuangzi. The irony is that most famous Taoists are just incredible scholars. They also talk about practicing Wu Wei, effortless action. Yet these were some of the busiest human beings you've ever read about. Gung Hai had just an extraordinary career in the multiple things that he did. Surongguai also just an incredibly long arm-length resume of achievements and activities. And so on the one hand, you have the text which preach this idea of a rejection of knowledge. On the other hand, you have these exemplars who are voracious consumers of knowledge. But I think that is the key: a consumption, absorption, and excretion of knowledge. You don't absorb it and take it on as gospel. It's not to be written in stone. It is knowable because it's useful and because it lets you do something with that knowledge, but you are willing to abandon it. I think it was Quine, the philosopher of science, who said there are two modes of science. One is subsisting and the other is revolutionary. And that most science, most places, is of a subsistence form or just sustaining form, going and repeating the same experiments, working from the same paradigms. But every once in a while, you get a Newton, you get an Einstein, and they are revolutionary because they reject the status quo that has become the accepted knowledge of the field. Newtonian physics were the accepted knowledge of the field of physical sciences until Einstein proved they're wrong. They're not, they weren't built upon, they were displaced. And you can see multiple occasions of that in the realm of the sciences. I do get the impression that the Taoist, by preaching, though I hate to say that word to describe it, but to preach this idea of a rejection of the overconsumption or the overabsorption into knowledge, really were trying to get revolutionizers in thought. That's what they were hoping to engineer, was somebody who was capable of taking all the old ideas on board, understanding them, not rejecting them out of hand, not accepting them out of hand, but testing them and coming up with new and or creative ideas, because that's actually what they got a lot of. Now, for the average person who wasn't going to be a scholar, probably better not to just go wading into that pond till you're neck deep in the muck and can't think your way out of a paper bag. Better to stay farming and happy. And I do think there was also some great respect for the sort of rural wisdom of the uneducated, of naivete, of out of the mouths of babes may be produced some of the finest wisdom one could encounter. And they had a true appreciation for that and sought that in those who weren't going to do sort of the deep dive of scholarly work.
Beautifully said. They're writing more notes actually than I am doing anything else. Evanique, do you want to follow up?
After Amon, probably not, but
Yeah. Yeah. That is a
But-
challenge.
yeah, but I'm not going to compare myself. So,
Good.
so I wanted to go back to what Penny was talking about, that circle of knowledge and what you know, and then what you don't know, and then what you don't know, you don't know. And I was thinking of that because I think it kind of relates to time and space, right? So when you think about the things you know, you think about, okay, I know my name, I know my age, I know my mom's name, I know my mom's age, right? It's very limited, and very small. And it's like a fixed thing, is what you know. You know, like certain things are just fixed in time and space, right? You know, and then there's what you don't know, which is also very fixed, right? In time and space. Like I don't know quantum physics at all. I know that I don't know mathematics besides adding, subtracting, dividing, and multiplying. After that, that's the limit, right? And then that circle of what you don't know, what you don't know. And that's, to me, is where it's transient. I think knowledge is transient and very fluid, because there's certain things that we knew 20 years ago. Like 20 years ago, maybe not even 20 years ago. Gosh, I'm old. Maybe like 30 years ago now, I would say, I knew how to use a payphone, right? And that was a valuable tool, and that was knowledge. Now, I'm sure if I saw a payphone, I would remember how to use it. But as I go along today, I no longer need that knowledge. So that knowledge may drop off, right? Because it is so transient. There is also, there's also things that we knew, like how to use a rotary phone. We also knew how to remember phone numbers. Now I can't remember anyone's phone number to save my life because they're all in my contacts. If you add, the only number I remember is my own and my mom's, because my mom never remembers hers. So I think knowledge is transient, whereas before knowing certain numbers was essential. So I think that's where it goes. It's kind of transient and fluid. And I think of knowledge, I think of more like what works and what doesn't work. And when you use knowledge, you use knowledge to make it work for the situation that you're in. And then through development of time and space, you know, either you no longer need the knowledge or the knowledge itself changes, like computers. You know, I knew how to type, right? And there was a typing class in high school that I learned on a computer. And now there's people that will just do the pecking thing, and it's no longer needed. Like also another example would be, I know cursive. Well, a lot of people don't use cursive anymore. It's just no longer needed. So it's a transient thing. And then the last point was actually something that Amon talked about, which is rural wisdom, which I think is more timeless, because that knowledge is from people's experience, right? So I think a great way to obtain knowledge is through other people's experience. Like, you know, our parents always said, you know, I'm telling you this because I lived through it and I did it and it wasn't a good idea. And sometimes we listen and sometimes we don't. But they're teaching us from their knowledge. And their knowledge comes from experience, which is actually a lot of times winds up to be very truthful. And it's because it is a lived thing. So if it's like, If you see this person going through this experience and you see it's not pleasant, unless you have a different way of going about it, you might want to listen to that person. And even if you do find a different way to go about it, it's like a progressive thing, right? Like, okay, I can figure out this is where it went wrong, but you're still using that knowledge, that experience to either progress, or you're just saying, okay, maybe I should avoid this. Maybe this is a good thing to avoid and go another direction. So those were my points. And I agree with what everyone else was saying. And this has just been like a great discussion.
Well, I think you really added to it there. You know, I really appreciate what you said about this, it being, you know, at a particular moment in time. And essentially that's what we're trying to figure out here. If we're trying to figure out what they thought at that particular moment in time, and what is knowledge at a particular, with culture and values at you know, what is actually being used and not being used, and why things have occurred. And that's a form of knowledge. It's a way of looking at history. And that's something we had not yet talked about, is the historical aspect of how we document things and think about things, and how that relates to what we build upon in the future. So that's a really important point. You know, that's essentially how empirical knowledge is actually incorporated into our history as well. That's something I've thought about a little bit lately. So thank you for moving the conversation forward. I really appreciate that, Avanique. I know Kevin. I think Kevin's next.
Yeah, quick comment about the knowledge, bring up again from McGregor, and I would bring another point about the knowledge. Yeah, basically knowledge come from experience. If I post one link, it's about the divide and Chronicle algorithm. This is from mathematics. This later we got easy, got a project, a problem. We start break them down. They deep down like a rabbit hole sometimes. You cannot see the what's the original come from. It's like current education system. It's so divided, you know. You higher education, you focus it divided even deeper. That's problem is if you better yin and yang, you look back. Oh, I need to do the integration. I need to do the induction. That's knowledge we gotta lose. That's the problem. Like I talk my side specialty, you talk yours. Then even from the world, I will a little bit off the topic here. What's you may heard about Iron Curtain? That's recently how our world divided. Because easy to manage. Another way, we need the integration. We not just for easy manage, easy divide. We also need how to kind of walk back. We need to talk each other, need to understand each other. What you know is I don't know. What I know, you not evaluate. So knowledge itself, we need to, that's like what's the wisdom? What's the word? What's the language? You cannot use because I don't speak English, you don't talk to me. I don't speak your value, your belief, you don't like me. You use technology, I don't use it, I lost contact. I have to catch up you. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, actually, what you're saying is actually maybe making me think a little bit more about how we use our judgment, which kind of gets to wisdom, because you're using judgment when you're comparing value systems as well. So what do you judge to be good or bad? So I appreciate that. Thank you, Kevin. Let me see. Brian, do you want? Yes, I'm always eager to hear. I'm always eager to hear from you, and Penny as well.
So it did strike me in listening to this discussion that at least to my mind, there's a difference in let's just call them assertions or types of assertions or in the context of our conversation, types of knowledge. And it's the difference between what I would call philosophical assertions and wisdom, or philosophical knowledge and wisdom. I think they're both based on experience. And I agree with what Kevin just said, a lot of the problems to my mind in this, failing to understand other people, is taking our philosophical knowledge and treating it like revelation from God or God's messenger, or as a scientific conclusion. And so we bypass mutual respect, the tolerance and mutual respect. But more to the point here, the wisdom is having an experience and then drawing a conclusion based on that experience, a conclusion about your experience. And so it might be using the poems of this, using the lines of this chapter 71. Someone might say, every time I don't know something, but I believe I know it, it has been a flaw for me. That would be wisdom, a statement of wisdom. And just also as it's been discussed here, I think pretty consistently by everyone, that would be wisdom. The thing about philosophy it's a little different. And in that you don't draw a personal conclusion, that you yourself are living by, or that you're sharing explicitly with others for their consideration. You're drawing a generalization that applies. You don't say, this, based on my experience, I have concluded that this is what works for me. You say that based on my experience, I have a conclusion that works for everyone. And it's expressed, it may not be quite that bold, but the philosophy, what I'm suggesting is expressed it's based on personal experience, but expressed in general terms. So it would come out with something like, not to know, but to believe it is known is a flaw. That's a very general statement. It's not based on personal experience. It's not explicitly based on personal experience. And it's not, the person who wrote this is not saying, that's what I'm going to live by. He's saying, that's what everybody should live by. That's the rule. And so I think that's a little bit the difference between wisdom and philosophy. Philosophy can be wisdom, but there can be wisdom which is not philosophized.
Well, you didn't disappoint, Brian. That's for sure. Excellent comments. Thank you so much for adding that. Would anybody else like to comment? Aman.
As long as we're talking about the ideas of wisdom, and particularly the lived experience and rural wisdom, there's a unfortunate anecdote that I'm feeling compelled to share. Irish relative of mine was sitting with a friend of his. He's an older man. The guy he was sitting with, also an older gentleman, but his friend had a daughter, fairly young, who got pregnant, and they were talking about that. He was going on and on and on to my uncle, and my uncle's listening to him. They're sharing a beer on the porch. And finally, after about it felt like an eternity of silence, I was out there listening to both of them. My uncle turns to him and says, well, she might not have felt it going in, but she'll feel it coming out for sure. That is the embodiment to me of rural wisdom. There wasn't a lot of profound thought to it, but a great deal of truth, and the pithy way he put it just kind of broke his buddy. He'd come over all distraught, and now he's cracking up, and so was I. And Uncle finished his beer and went back into the house. This is what rural wisdom actually looks like. I think, at least in my experience, that it captures something so exquisitely true that it just shocks in the appreciation of it. And I think that that sort of idea was really valued by Lao Tzu, by Zhuangzi, by most of the Taoists. They saw that as the par excellence of someone being wise and someone worth listening to.
You never
And
know.
I'm sorry to everybody who had to hear that story.
Well, don't be. But it's also that wisdom can come from anywhere as well, which is a very important point. Instead of us looking for it, it's this idea of listening to, it's the most important thing of them all. Thank you, Aman. I don't see any other hands up. And okay, so if it's all right with everyone, then we'll go to verse 72. Go ahead and type exclamation point to read your favorite version of verse 72. Stephanie, thank you.
Sure, no problem. Chapter 72. This is from John Mabry, a Christian reading of Dao De Jing. When people lose their fear of power, then great power has indeed arrived. Do not intrude on the people's material living. Do not dispense their spiritual lives either. If you respect them, you will be respected. Therefore, the sage knows himself, but he is not opinionated. He loves himself, but he is not arrogant. He lets go of conceit and opinion and embraces self-knowledge and love.
Thank you, Avanique. Next up, we have Penny.
Okay,
Or it's actually David, then Penny. I'm sorry about that.
that's fine.
So I think I'll do the DC Lin. That was better for the previous chapter. I think it's better for this one. When people have no fear of force, then, as is the common practice, great force descends on them. Despise not their dwellings, dislike not their progeny, because you do not like them. You will not be disliked yourself. Therefore, the sage knows himself, but does not show himself, loves himself, but does not exalt himself. Therefore, he rejects the one force and accepts the other gentility.
Thank you, David. Next up, we have Penny now.
Okay, this is the J.H. McDonald. When people become overly bold, then disaster will soon arrive. Do not meddle with people's livelihoods. If you respect them, they will in turn respect you. Therefore, the master knows herself, but is not arrogant. She loves herself, but also loves others. This is how she is able to make appropriate choices.
Thank you, Penny. And next up, we have Margarita. Do you want to read in Bahasa? And Madeline as well.
Maybe Madeline first. And
Yeah,
I will
sure. Yes, Madeline, go ahead.
Okay, this is from the Jia Fu Feng and Jane English. When men lack a sense of awe, there will be disaster. Do not intrude in their homes. Do not harass them at work. If you do not interfere, they will not weary of you. Therefore, the sage knows himself but makes no show, has self-respect but is not arrogant. He lets go of that and chooses this.
Thank you, Madeline. Next up is Margarita.
Yes. I need to readjust this chapter because somehow it's translated more into the ruling of a country. So maybe more of Confucian ideas. But now I think I want to make I make it in line with I forgot yet. Ursula. So, jika rakyat sudah tidak takut lagi dengan hal yang menakutkan, maka akan tiba bahaya. Jangan mempersempit tempat tinggal, jangan melakukan hal yang bodoh. Jika menolak kebodohan, maka tidak melakukan kebodohan. Seorang bijak tahu diri sendiri, namun tak menonjolkan diri. Merawat diri sendiri, namun tak memegahkan diri. Melepaskan sebagian diri, dan menyimpan sebagian untuk dipelihara dalam diri. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will go ahead and read the Ursula Le Guin version since it's similar to that. The right fear. When we don't fear what we should fear, we are in fearful danger. We ought not live in narrow houses. We ought not do stupid work. If we don't accept stupidity, we won't act stupidly. So wise souls know but don't know themselves. Look after but don't prize themselves. Letting the one go, keeping the other. Let's see, so oh, and Katie, go ahead.
Okay, I'm reading from Stephen Mitchell. When they lose their sense of awe, people turn to religion. When they no longer trust themselves, they begin to depend upon authority. Therefore, the master steps back so that people won't be confused. He teaches without a teaching so that people will have nothing to learn.
Thank you, Katie. Brian. You're on mute.
I also liked the Stephen Mitchell that Katie just read.
Oh, okay. So with that, then we will go to Jason.
Okay. I hope I don't disappoint everyone because I just honor to this chapter. Before I start, there's a word called way. Okay, that's very important word in Chinese political philosophy. But in Dao De Jing only appear once, but it will be used a lot in the legalism teaching. So I translate as all or called all-inspiring majesty. That means as a ruler, you have some quality as way. That means not really as a fearful, but really as a, like in your position, okay, and then you have the potential to do something to your people. People kind of like scale of you. So this kind of position, this kind of attitude, we call way. Okay, I think all Chinese know this word, but just very difficult to translate to English. So this one is talking about way, and this one has been used in the Han Feizi, in the legalism teaching. So, so this is a little bit different than most of the translation if you take this perspective. So, okay, I'm going to do the translation. Remember, the Lao Tzu is talking to the ruler, okay, asking of the prince, telling him how to rule his own state. So he said, if people fear not the awe-inspiring majesty, a great awful event may come. Okay, so if people are not afraid, I mean the ruler's way, which is, okay, doesn't have this feeling, then they have, actually it's not good for the people because the awful event will come, that means from the heaven. So you'd better have the people afraid of you by your way, if they don't afraid of you, they will do something else, and the turnout it's even worse because the punishment will from the heaven. So that's the first sentence talking about. So they tell the ruler, you know, you have this way, okay, you have this power, this position, doesn't mean that you just do whatever you want to do, just become a tyranny, right? Basically, you have to be careful about your position. So he said, the ruler should not limit people's places. He should not oppress people's livelihood. Basically, you don't want to interfere the people's life. Don't limit them. You just keep your position, your awe-inspiring majesty, the way, okay? So then he continued. He means the sage, the ruler. He does not oppress people. For this reason, he is not oppressed by people. I'm not sure oppress is right. Another word to use is reject. He never reject because the yen means when you eat too much, you cannot eat anymore. Okay, so that's the meaning. So basically, you don't reject people, you don't suppress, you don't oppress people. So people will not, you can say, hate or reject you. So the last sentence, therefore, the sage is self-knowing but not self-flaunting. He is self-caring but not self-exalting. So basically, talk about two things: too good, too bad. So the sage, remember, the sage is the ruler, the role model for the ruler. So the sage know themselves. Know the ruler should know yourself, but not show yourself. So basically, tell him you are hiding, okay, behind the veil, but you have the position. You don't show your face, put this way. You just know yourself. Then most of the translation called self-love. The word I, okay, means in today's sense means love. But I think more proper meaning probably self-caring, asks you to take care of your life as a ruler, but not self-exalting. Okay, don't see yourself as so important to put it in the dangerous position. So that's the lesson. Okay, he is teaching. So the last sentence basics is repeat. Indeed, prefer the former. That means the former means self-knowing, self-caring, to the later, but that means not self-flaunting, not self-exalting. So that's the teaching on this one. Basics is teaching the ruler about the concept of way and how to do this. So that's my interpretation.
Excellent. Actually, you can see some parallels between what is it, 70 and actually in 72 as well. But everybody go ahead and line up, type exclamation point to share your thoughts on verse 72. Anyone? Margarita, thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
Well, this is my mistake again, because sometimes I'm not sure whether the Bahasa translation is correct or not, but I think Jason just mentioned it is about ruling the government. So sometimes it can be right, the Bahasa, the current translation. But I wonder why in this chapter, the people, why did they choose the word fear over this supposed to be like sage ruler? I mean, wise ruler. Why is fear? Why is not other kind of emotion, for example, something like that? Thank you.
Yeah, let me answer this one because the fear is not the right translation. Okay, that's why I call it way. Okay, that's the original Chinese called way. That's a concept. people are feel you. You are fearful as a ruler. You are fearful, but not really this kind of fear, like kind of like you feel your father. Okay, talking about the traditional. Okay, father, you feel okay, but you it's not really like he's going to kill you, punish you. Okay, but you afraid of you. That another way to talk about is. Don't use use some religion, Buddhism, okay, or Taoism. They have the statue of the huge statue of Buddha, right? And then you walk by, you have kind of fear, okay, about the statue, okay, because but the statue is not going to punish you anyway, but you have kind of the fear of awe if you pass by a huge Buddha statue. Okay, so you may kind of this kind of feeling. So I think that's the one Taoism teaching on the political science, right? He tells you like as a ruler, you should become like a big statue sitting there, okay, and not do much things, okay. So it's people will kind of fear your majesty, but not really scared of you might kill him because you're not going to do anything, okay. Another thing about love. So people also don't feel like I love the leader or I love the ruler. No, they are very distant away, far away from the people. So you feel the distance. I mean, as a people, you feel the distance. You feel the way which is the awe-inspiring majesty. Okay, this kind of situation. Okay, so I think that's the thing he's talking about. And the concept of way is a difficult concept, but it's very common in the Chinese speaking, or I think also in Japanese also have the same kind of concept, so-called way. Okay.
Thank you. Next up, we have Avanique.
Yeah, I think the part I love about this chapter is where it says, therefore the sage knows himself, but he is not opinionated. He loves himself, but he is not arrogant. He lets go of conceit and opinion and embraces self-knowledge and love. And I think when you have knowledge of yourself, and it kind of goes to 71, like, and you know what you don't know, and you know there's a lot of things that you don't know. And you know that you're not even aware of what you don't know, but you know who you are in that moment. I think that's the key in having control over yourself. And, loving yourself is not a bad thing. And knowing that if you love yourself, you don't have to think you're better than anybody else. If you love yourself, you don't have to put yourself above anybody else. If you love yourself, you don't have to be arrogant. Like, you don't have to show off. You don't have to show how great you are. You can just be who you are, and the greatness comes out. And I think it kind of relates to the beginning of 72, where it says, when people lose their fear of power, then great power has indeed arrived. And I think Jason made a good point. And I was thinking when he said, it's not like fear, like, ooh, like I'm scared. I was thinking respect or admiration, or just something like when Jason made the analogy of the father, it's like you fear them, you respect their authority, right? But when I think, like, the way this translation here works, and then I'm not in any way claiming Jason's translation is wrong, but in this translation, the way that works is that when people lose their fear of power, then great power has indeed arrived. And I think sometimes people fear power because they've seen it used in so many ways that are wrong. But if you lose the fear of having power, or I think of it as, just fear of power in general, then because once you don't fear something, you respect it. And I think that is why I think that when Jason was talking about the respect of a father, that really struck me. It's because you don't fear a parent that is loving and cares for you, but you respect them and you listen to what they say because out of respect and out of love, not out of fear or abuse or anything like that. So they have that power, but you respect it because they've earned it and because they know who they are. You see that, and that's something you want to emulate. So I just love this poem. I think I could go on all night, but I'm going to shut up.
No, they're great points. I mean, the element of humility allows you to respect whatever it is, because you're actually you're acknowledging your own. I guess it's not shortcomings, but it's a form of respect that when you're humble, that
Yeah.
you're showing a certain admiration for the position that you're in.
I think it's like you recognize your own limitations. Like, you're not, that there are limitations within you.
Right.
And I think I think once you see that, you're not afraid of it, but and you're not ashamed of it either, because you just recognize it for what it is, and it just is.
Great comment, Dominique. So next up we have Katie. And then I have a question for Jason.
I think that it also kind of relates a little bit to Wu Wei a little
Yeah.
bit. Like, for me, whenever I see any type of state that needs to use like a huge apparatus to enforce whatever it's trying to force, I'm always like, well, if it's that unnatural to try to get people to do it that way, then don't you see that it doesn't work? Like, if you need this like huge apparatus of people to come behind and be following you around and messing into your private affairs, and that means whatever system, it isn't natural for people to be doing it like that. So I guess for me, like, Wu Wei would be like, you don't really need to govern that much, or you don't need to meddle that much, because it can, you're working with people's natural tendencies. So that's my.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, because I was reading a little bit about Lao Tzu, and while and I wanted to ask Jason about this, is that one person had written that while Lao Tzu always talked about doing what was in accordance with the Tao, that he also was in favor of doing, a ruler should do what's best for the people. And that may not always be in accordance with the Tao. Do you agree with that statement, Jason, or is that an accurate statement?
Well, okay. The first question would be, what do you mean for the best for the people, right?
Well, yeah, that's a big yeah, right.
That's a big question, right? So does the people know what he wants? That's another question. So, okay, so I think everybody know. I think Putin also know, okay? He has to do the best for his people, the Russian, right? Xi Jinping know what he has to do for the best of the Chinese. And Biden know what he has to do the best for America. So everybody know, I think that's no doubt about it. But the question is, does the people know what he wants? Okay, are they all agree? I think that's a big question. So different school have a different interpretation. For Confucius, okay, he thinks the best for the people is to keep the social order, right? So the father become the king, the emperor is doing the emperor's job, the minister doing the minister's job, a father doing father's job, a son doing son's job. Everybody according to their position, keep the social structure. That's the best for the people. So I think that's what Confucius will say. And then for the Taoism, especially for Lao Tzu, basically it's talking about don't bother. They assume people know what's the best for them. So they just wake up and farm in the field. At the evening, they go home to sleep and have dinner with the family. So they don't care. The emperor is, you are using democratic system, communist system. They don't care. As long as they wake up, they farm in the field and get their food and they go back to sleep. So they are happy. I think that's the Taoism is thinking. So that's why it's kind of like a Wu Wei, because usually you do something, it's damage more than help. So the best way is, hands off. I think that's the Taoism teaching, especially for Lao Tzu on this one.
Yeah, I see Kevin has his hand up, but thank you for clarifying that for me, or actually KDN, or no, Kevin. Yeah, because one of the things, the way you explained it too, is by not interfering, people are then happy. So then, like, that's kind of what's best, if that's where you're putting the premium, and so that the idea of Wu Wei would actually fit within that concept. It also fits with the other ideas of the sage that we've heard throughout the Tao, with this. We talked about it just a moment ago with Evanik, is the idea of humility, and we saw that in number 70 as well, where we would talk about what was underneath the, essentially what was the jade. That's what I'm thinking of, essentially, is that the not wearing the spectacles, not kind of. Anyway, I'm just blabbering for now. Kevin, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. For me, a little bit, that's for that kind of time for the rulers and the people, how they deal with their relationship, governor. Now I think about like between the modern days, it's a little bit complex. For example, I'm going to open mind and brainstorm. Like, for example, if I'm going to election time, I can favor to my people, benefit certain people, then deduct this, that. When there's internal fair, for example, people not happy, for example, this pandemic going to happen, we're going to look outside. For example, we can look for some war. Everybody unified, everybody with me. Is this happening like in Europe now? Don't forget World War I. After pandemic, I cannot remember if it's during pandemic or after pandemic, war launched right away. Then continuously, if we use World War I from Germany people, they thought too much. They say, you ask too much, I cannot afford it. That's one guy jump out. Okay, go with me. So we don't fear any, nobody, no other country external force. This disaster happened across the world. We are just beginning this year. So where's the people? People need very limited. I need a place to stay. Don't press me. It's just IG. This is one of its words called IG. I need a place to stay, have food. Simply like that. If like ourselves here, we can talk about the retirement plan for one, and education, next generation to plan next year vacation. When this going to happen for the European, I just leave there. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Jason, do you have any comment?
No, not
Okay.
much.
Okay.
I like to talk about, use this chance to talk about the concept of way here and from the other point of view, from Confucius, okay? If you're familiar with Confucius will talk about Junzi as a role model, okay? As a person, a more Junzi must have weighed this kind of concept. Okay, not only the ruler. So he said, if you are not serious enough, you don't have weight. Okay, serious, that's my translation. But basically, he used the word heavy. So you got to be, like heavy. You're not like me, talk so much, move hand around. That's not weight. Okay, so you should be like statue like this as a Junzi, not only a ruler, as a Junzi. You should statue like this and not moving your head, moving your body. And I probably too skinny. I probably been gain some weight. So feel the heaviness, okay, of this one. So, if you observe the leader, okay, the authoritative government leader, Xi or Putin, they have the way, okay. The Democratic leader, like Biden, like hug the kids, and then done this kind. That's no way, right? If you want to know what's the way, look at Xi Jinping, look at Putin. Okay, that's the perfect face of way, I think.
That was interesting. Brian.
Well, the general on this number 72, I like very, very much in general. I have no disagreement with what's said, but I have an observation about it, is that it is, wow, this thing was written a long time ago, 500 BC, 400 BC. I can never remember the date. Maybe nobody knows, and yes, there was philosophy going on in Greece at the time. And people also then were beginning to think in terms that weren't always tied to God. But this strikes me as such a practical text and so modern in its approach. I can't think of anything that in the West that had come up until Machiavelli. When Machiavelli wrote about the princes, the competing princes in Italy at the beginning of the Renaissance. The thing that really strikes me is, number one, it's a guide directed to the princes, unlike what the Greek philosophy was, which was more just general observations. And then number two, it really does reflect on psychology, and it takes like the psychology of individuals and groups and uses that in the context of government relations to make some very concrete recommendations. It strikes me as very modern, something that we even today would see as very modern, and it's in that way it's just amazing.
I agree with you, and actually, I that's one of the reasons, and you mentioned as to why you like the Stephen Mitchell translation. That was the reason why I actually liked that particular translation as well, because I found it was like very, very, very practical, and interesting comments. So let's see what we have next. We have. Oh, I think okay. Brian was the last comment. So are there any other comments for verse 72? I actually did quite a bit of reading about it, but there also seemed to be a lot of confusion too. Their translations were very different. That's one thing I noticed as to why, and I'm not sure as to why that would have been, because they varied across the board. All the way down to the Ursula Le Guin one was pretty puzzling in certain cases, especially when she talked about the idea that if we don't accept stupidity, we won't act stupidly, and I really was kind of unclear where she was going with that particular statement, but actually, Margarita, you may actually know, since you typed an exclamation point, because it's similar and Bahasa.
Yes, yeah, I noticed that. I think, but what I want to make comment is, even though this is also was written for the potential ruler about at that time, but I think it's also just like Brian said, still relevant to certain contexts. I think in certain contexts, this charismatic leader who know to take care of themselves, presenting themselves well as a leader who can create this awe-inspiring reaction from the people, that's kind of important in certain contexts, but maybe in other contexts, the distance between the people and the leader, it should not be that the gap is not too wide. Some people would choose more like shorter power gap, and and I think this chapter, after rereading this, maybe it also can be transferred into family context. Father, when Jason said father, I remember my late father. My late father is someone who presents himself with a distance from the child. So, but again, I think in order to be awe of something, you shouldn't be like too close. If it's too close, you can't see the greatness of this object. Perhaps you do need certain kind of distance, but that distance must be used really well by the father or the leader to show the great things that this person can do. Yeah, so I think this chapter reminds me again about where am I in the position with the ruler or the leader, and how should the leader make use of this distance or gap, power gap, to make to show himself as a great source of leadership. Yeah, thank you.
That's an interesting question, Jason. Was there much of a power gap in this times between the leadership and the people?
What do you mean, the power gap between leadership and people? I think they always have a.
I mean, but was it much, because there were so many different states?
Okay, let's put it this way. At that time, okay, probably the distance between leader or the ruler and the people, forget about people. People always far away. One thing I'd like to mention is during that time, the ruler, the emperor, and the minister are close. Okay, but after later time, especially after Han dynasties, they start to install the Confucianism. Okay, then the ruler and the minister has a distance increase. So during this time, you can imagine the situation, the court, the royal court, probably very similar to Western. You respect, you probably bow to the emperor, but you probably sit down together to discussing things. But after the Han dynasty, Chinese start to install the Confucianism. So they respect the ritual, right? So the distance are away. So whenever you talk to the emperor, you have to on your knee, okay? So you don't sit side by side, face to face to talk. You just kneel down. After about 12th, 13th century, the Mongolian invasion, China was totally become for 100 years. After that, the Ming dynasty, they follow the Mongolian rule. The Mongolian, they are, let's put it this way, barbarian. Okay, if you imagine the situation, kind of like, okay, if you remember the Bible, okay, Joseph was in the jail, right? Do you wonder why the person, the cup carrying the bread cutter, they're also the advisor for the king, for the pharaoh, right? Same, that's the typical situation for like the Mongolian. So you are the servant and you are also the general. So after that, the situation become like the minister is the servant of the emperor. So, you know, the distance between emperor and the minister even further away, because the the minister actually is your servant. So you are my prime minister, but you also, shine my shoes, okay, at the same time. So basically, this kind of concept start to build in. So the distance get further and further away. If I probably cite of some different out of subject, but basically, if you talk about the gap, it's getting bigger and bigger. Okay, that's why have a revolution, and that's why when the Western force come to China, and China has no way to defend, because for few thousand years the system totally corrupted. That's my opinion. Sorry.
No, thank you. Kevin.
Yes, thank you, Jason. I agree with Jason about that. And yeah, I based the tax, it's if you think about this, it's like now they talk about the rulers' relationship to the people. These days, who talk about this? Like self-alive, not but I don't. I even know it, self-know it, but I don't want to express it. This kind of like virtue I would consider, it's not anymore. No, if I have power, that's the time I'm going to sign up. Either president or the manager. So that's totally different than what we practice these days. I would say, you can imagine a Greek time. That time, like open floor, you can discuss and talk. And for me, another big question, why this happened at 500 BC, that period of time? Why both the east side, west side, how this kind of beautiful thing happened? For example, even our Chinese words, related to idiom, all from those warring state. It's very surprised. A kind of knowledge. It's why knowledge. If we talk about the knowledge, our tradition, all those time affect a lot, include China and East Asia, I would say. And then slowly, like Jason mentioned, history, especially Ching. Ching is turning point. It's like end point by Qing dynasty, right? Everything unified. Unify what's happening. The track. Same trail, same language, and also in Ha, only like I guess Jason mentioned, only Confucius kind of simplified, and Qing dynasty legalism, and yeah, it's like now we have to like democracy. Have we question about democracy, freedom? This is so problematic. Lots time is like I 10% control 90%. If one example, for example, on two convoy, one Canadian truck convoy, right? It's 90% vaccine, then but 10% of 10% of a 10% could be 1% protest. How big impact? How about the leaders invest in current war? Who launched this war? Who inspired it? Who controlled? Who worried about? Who going to suffering? Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments about verse number 72?
Yeah, let me make a quick comment here.
Yeah. I was wondering actually.
Yeah, Joe talked about especially this translation. This chapter is so widely different, So
yes.
That's a common problem in Dao De Jing, and because there's no subject, every word they just say it. So if you assume is the Lao Tzu teaching prince, that's one thing. If you assume you are the regular people, Lao Tzu is telling you, okay, as a regular commoner, that will become another story. You think about, you reflect yourself, that's become another story. So basically, I have many different ways to translate, put this way. but I just have to, based on the historical background, based on the words they are using, sage. So I kind of assume, okay, and then it's a teaching to the ruler, to the prince. That's I said. Unlike Confucius, analect, right? You know, Confucius has the ambition on the political, has his own political goal. Confucius is telling his disciple, comment on that. So you know the background, but this one you don't know. So that's why the translation has so much difference. So I think also the beauty of this one is you can, even I fix on the teacher teaching the ruler. I think the Aman mentioned this one. When you give advice or teach a ruler, you are different than Confucius teaching the disciple, right? You kind of a little bit humble, talk about in a different way. So the tone will be a little bit different. So it opened a different kind of way of thinking, unlike Confucius analog, kind of like, you should do this, do this, do this.
Right.
This one is right, this is wrong. But this one is a little bit, flexible, a little bit, subtle. So that opened a different way to understand. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great explanation as to. I mean, it's a good distinction between Confucianism and Taoism. But yeah, I think it's also I noticed, and this is true throughout the Dao De Jing, is the liberty that the writers take. You can kind of see themes in different writers, and some that try to stay true to the text, and some that don't. One of my favorite translators is, the one Katie often reads, is Stephen Mitchell. He takes a lot of liberties with the words that I've noticed, and he's one of my favorites. But I mean, this one just seemed like every one I read, and I read I don't know, 7 or 8 versions, and I could have, I mean, some were similar, but I could have come away with something different. So I started just reading about Lao Tzu after this, just to get more of an idea of what he might have been saying at that particular moment, or for that particular verse. Yeah, so those are my comments. The translations are very, very difficult. That's one thing that you've definitely taught me during this period, is just how challenging it is to do the translations, and to have the context and the knowledge to actually. I have a new appreciation for what you do, for what people that actually, anybody that does these translations does, essentially. So with that, if there's no, let me see if there's anybody else. I don't see anyone else, but I'm gonna one, say thank you for everyone for attending, and 2, I'm gonna make a announcement for upcoming events. The first event that I actually definitely want to tell everybody about is Saturday's upcoming Asian Philosophies meetup, which is the Yin Yang School in Chinese cosmogony. Is that true? Is that right?
Yeah,
Is that this
yeah.
Saturday?
Yeah, that's this Saturday. Basically, talk about yin yang and kind of mysticism. Okay, so I think that's to the Book of Change, the I Ching and yin yang 5 elements. All this kind of thing. And then I just, before I joined this one, I just finished the material. I find out probably it's a lot. So basically, I would like to do is from the ancient time, and then we still can see the today's the Chinese practice, or become more international, like feng shui, okay, this kind of thing. That's all have a source from there. So that's that probably the subject I'm going to deal with on this Saturday.
Okay, I'm looking forward to that. And so then the rest of the week for 52 Living Ideas. Tomorrow we're talking about the interaction between writing and conversation, and it's about these new hyperbooks that essentially Shrikant is building with each one of the meetups. So it's just a question. And I actually thought about maybe how it could play in, and maybe the Dao De Jing would be a good good way of using a scribal hyperbook, essentially, that makes a lot of notes about what people have said during the meetups, that captures the discussion in addition to the material that we link to. And he's going to discuss that in great detail tomorrow as to why he thinks this is a new way of actually educating people in general. And I'm looking forward to that. Thursday, he's going to be covering Thomas Aquinas on the Gospel of John, verses 3 through 5, and lectures 2 and 3. And then we have the Bhagavad Gita on that is on Friday and Saturday, I believe, as well. Yes, it's on Friday and Saturday. And that'll be covering chapter 8. Now, Saturday, it's unfortunate I'm going to have to miss this, but Yasuhiko will be here, which is a really, really fantastic event. Anytime he comes here to speak. And that is Saturday at 11 a.m. I'm really regretting the fact that I have to miss that. And then there's at 2 o'clock, there's the Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. They're coming up on the end of that novel. And Sunday, we have our ongoing course with the Center for the Study of Digital Life, and that's with Mark Stallman, and that is at Sunday at 3, and Sunday at 5 is Dostoevsky. So we got a lot coming up in the next few days. So I hope to see everyone here. Thank you again for joining us this evening, and everybody for your comments. They were fantastic. And I appreciate Brian and Penny, as always, to see you guys. It's great. Evanique, Katie, Marco, everybody. Chang, welcome back. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Jay.
Thank you,
Thank
Joe.
you, thank you, Jason. Thank you, Jason.
Jason.
Thank you.
I'll
Thank
see you
you,
Saturday.
guys.
I'll see you Saturday.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.